Thank you for watching Stop the Traffic's training on preventing modern slavery in hotels during COVID-19. Stop the Traffic is a human trafficking and modern slavery prevention organisation working in the UK. You're watching this training because you are working in a hotel housing individuals who were previously homeless, or because you work for an organisation who is supporting people being housed in one of these hotels. The housing of people who are currently homeless in hotels will definitely have a positive impact, but we also need to be aware of the risks of exploitation occurring. It is an opportunity to engage many individuals who have historically been completely isolated from services. Working in hotels, you are the eyes and ears. You might spot something that nobody else can. We are asking you to know what exploitation is, know how to spot it, and know how to report it. Everyone in the community has a responsibility to stop modern slavery, but it is also important to remember that you are not the police. Never confront anybody, and never put yourself at risk. All we are asking you to do is to keep your eyes open, and if you do see something that feels strange or that doesn't sit right with you, tell someone who can do something about it. This training is primarily aimed at hotel staff, but we understand that other organisations will also be using it. Staff from homeless support organisations will have a different background knowledge, and your safeguarding responsibilities would be different. We have some extra information for staff from support organisations in the last 2 slides, which explores how to achieve this 4th step. Supporting potential victims. As you can see, nearly 11,000 survivors were supported last year in the UK. Many people think it must only happen to people from other countries, and although other nationalities are affected, the most common nationality of survivors identified last year was British. It affects children and adults, men and women. It can affect anyone. But unfortunately, these survivors are the tip of the iceberg. The government estimates there are up to 13,000 more victims in the UK at one time, with other estimates ranging as high as 136,000 people, all within the UK. Modern slavery preys on the vulnerable. This includes people experiencing homelessness. Due to coronavirus, many homeless people have been cut off from their only means of making money, unable to work, and more difficult to beg, shoplift, or sex work. This is only pushing people further into the control of their exploiters. Research done by Stop the Traffic in Manchester found that 1 in 3 people accessing homelessness services had received an offer of work in exchange for accommodation, drugs, food or alcohol, and 1 in 5 knew someone who had disappeared after accepting this type of offer. Similar research in London by a charity called Hestia found that 1 in 10 people rough sleeping have experienced modern slavery. It is clear that throughout the country, people experiencing homelessness are at risk of modern slavery. People experiencing homelessness are vulnerable to modern slavery because they might be desperate to get a job, so might be persuaded to work for little or no money. They might have a drug dependency which exploiters can take advantage of. They might not have a family network to rely on for support or to ask for help. They might not be identified as missing if they disappear, as they are hidden from society. Or they might not, in order to access support, they might have to face environments with dangerous and predatory individuals. But statistics can only tell you half the story, so here is a case study that we have from Greater Manchester. Matt, a 19-year-old young man from Greater Manchester, was rough sleeping after being kicked out of his family home. One day he was approached by a woman while begging. She gave him a drink and cigarettes and offered him a place to stay in return for a share of the money that he made begging. In the apartment, Matt was given weed, then later as the woman and her associates encouraged him to escalate his drug use, crack and heroin as well. They told him that he would pay it back later. After a couple of weeks, Matt owed them hundreds of pounds. With no way to pay off the debt, the woman's associates became violent and Matt was told that he would have to sex work and sell drugs to pay back the money. He didn't want to, but he was scared of what would happen if he didn't, and he had nowhere else to go. Matt was forced to sleep with so many men that he lost count. His substance use escalated and he lost all hope of ever being able to pay off the debt. This continued for almost a year until Matt built up enough trust with an outreach worker from a local charity who found him to disclose what had happened to him and to find him an alternative place to live and a place on a drug rehabilitation program. We need to know what modern slavery is. Importantly, it is not about ownership or chains. Modern slavery is cleverer than that. Modern slavery has a complicated legal definition with different elements, but you don't need to know this. What you need to know is that all cases of modern slavery include these 2 elements: the use of deception or coercion for the purposes of exploitation. This means that a victim is either tricked or forced to do something that another person gains from financially. You might also hear the phrase human trafficking or exploitation. Human trafficking, modern slavery, exploitation are all pretty much the same thing, so you don't need to know the difference and you can treat them as the same. We will now look at each of these two elements in detail. These deception and coercion techniques focus on the recruitment of people experiencing homelessness. Offering jobs and favours which are too good to be true are a common technique, but when it comes to people experiencing homelessness, there is also evidence of exploiters offering jobs or asking for favours which only pay in food, housing or drugs. In the past, there has been evidence of exploiters picking up people experiencing homelessness from soup kitchens and targeting hostels and even B&Bs. With these closed, we want staff at the hotels where homeless people are being housed to be aware that they might be targeted instead, and indeed in some areas they already have. Those with drug dependency issues are at a heightened risk as their addiction means that they can be taken advantage of. Exploiters can make a victim do as they wish by controlling their access to drugs. Victims may have borrowed money from exploiters and have this debt held over them to pressure them to do things. Victims will generally pay more than double back what they have borrowed, and debts will increase even though victims are making payments. Predatory individuals are experts at finding victims' vulnerabilities and manipulating them for control. They could prey on socially isolated individuals with no family ties and prevent them from accessing the support needed to escape their exploitation, or take advantage of individuals with learning difficulties who might not fully understand that they are being exploited. Using violence or threatening is also common. This might occur once the victim has started to be exploited, forcing them to stay out of fear, even if they might be able to escape or if somebody would think that they weren't necessarily locked away. Emotional manipulation is common when exploiting minors, but it can also happen to adults, particularly young people and people leaving care. This can involve the exploiter developing a loving relationship or a seemingly loving relationship with the victim, gaining their trust before abusing their position and making them do things as part of their relationship. Exploiters will also befriend their victims, part of the control of making sure they repay. Victims feel indebted to a friend who's done so much for them, and exploiters will use this to take advantage. When we talk about people experiencing homelessness, there are four main types of exploitation we should be aware of. Sexual exploitation, what you might know as sex trafficking, is when a victim, adult or child, female or male, is forced to perform sexual services and someone else gains financially. This might take place in brothels, but it can also happen in hotels or on the street or online as well. Labour exploitation, or what you might know as forced labour, is when a victim is made to work for none or very little money or reward. In the UK, the common sectors this happens are construction, agriculture, food manufacturing and cleaning. Criminal exploitation can often happen at the same time as other types of exploitation and might involve the victim's details being used to commit fraud, or they would never see the money, or even having benefits or other financial support being paid into their accounts. Other types of forced crime include when victims are forced to shoplift or beg to pay off their debt. Sometimes victims will also be forced to commit violent crimes. Much of this is often closely related to the drugs trade. The drugs trade is closely linked with modern slavery. Many of you will have heard of county lines, which involves minors and young adults being forced into transporting and selling drugs on behalf of gangs. Exploiters use victims so that they are never at risk of arrest, but still keep the money. But adult victims can also be exploited in the drugs trade, and frequently this is something that we'll see amongst people experiencing homelessness, who often get caught up in drug trade in city centres, with being pressured into selling and transporting drugs with their exploiters watching on from nearby, safe from arrest and harm. Unfortunately, Stop the Traffic has had intelligence that the drug supply is getting into hotels housing people who are homeless as part of the emergency COVID-19 response, and that hotels have also been targeted by loan sharks looking to make good on their debts. Although there are many ways modern slavery can occur, there are 3 ways exploitation might occur in hotels housing people who are currently homeless. It is important to stress that though exploitation might occur, it isn't definitely going to happen, but it's worth being aware of just in case. Firstly, residents might be exploiting other residents. For example, one resident might be forcing another resident to perform sexual acts for money within the hotel. This can be done by and to both men and women. You might notice the signs of frequent sex when in rooms, or you might see multiple residents visiting one room or walking around the corners. Secondly, as we've already mentioned, Hotels where people who are homeless are being housed during the lockdown might be targeted by exploiters who want to pick up new victims. You might see vans or people hanging around near the entrance to the hotel talking to residents, maybe trying to befriend them by offering them money, drugs or food. Or you might see residents being picked up and dropped off at the end of each day by the same car or van. These exploiters might be recruiting for sexual or labour exploitation. Finally, the residents might not be the only victims on site. Victims of modern slavery might also be delivering the drugs to the residents. For example, you might see vulnerable people or minors visiting the site to meet multiple residents. They might be forced to deal by criminal gangs who could often be nearby. Unfortunately, when it comes to modern slavery, there aren't clear-cut groups of perpetrators and victims. In fact, the distinction can often be blurred. Exploitation can sometimes be a means of survival for people on the streets, where drugs have such a force over many people's lives, and sometimes the only option of exploiting someone else can prevent an individual's own victimisation. Modern slavery is a complicated crime. It relies on subtle psychological control of victims, which isn't always obvious. However, there are some signs which you should be aware of. These behavioural cues can indicate that exploitation is happening. Large amounts of cash in the room, a resident that mentions they owe money, drugs found in a room or around hotel, strangers at the hotel demanding money or favours, residents with signs of assault or abuse, multiple visitors to one room, targeting younger residents who are taken under the wing by older, more long-term homeless individuals, residents mentioning that their benefits are going to others or that they don't have access to their bank account, a resident who is always accompanied by another, residents showing signs of trauma, strangers trying to enter the premises, residents who won't say where they are going, particularly if they leave after answering the phone, residents who receive gifts, residents who are picked up and dropped off from the hotel. Noticing one of these signs doesn't prove modern slavery is happening. In fact, it could be a sign of something completely innocent. For example, someone being taken under their wing could be someone generally being trying to help. Or just because somebody is taking or picking up drugs doesn't mean that there's any modern slavery involved at all. However, once you see 2 or 3 of these signs, you should definitely report your concerns to someone who has the responsibility to safeguard the residents. Remember, unless you are a support worker, you should not investigate or question residents. Never confront somebody you suspect of exploitation. Do not put yourself in harm's way. Further to the general signs, there are other signs which you might see which indicate a specific form of exploitation. It is important to remember that often people are exploited in several different ways by their traffickers, and you shouldn't discount other forms if you see signs of one. For sexual exploitation, residents could request more bedding or towels. Residents could leave hotel at night, especially if picked up or dropped off. Multiple used condoms could be found in a room. There could be signs of a controlling or abusive relationship, with one of the partners seemingly being forced or coerced into sex working for the financial gain of the other. There could be frequent visitors to the same hotel room throughout the day or evening. For criminal exploitation, you could see young or vulnerable people frequently visiting the hotel, potentially delivering drugs. Violence and threats within the hotels between groups of residents. This might be because different residents might associate with different and rival drug gangs. Residents mention bullying or intimidation, finding weapons within the accommodation, young residents joining groups of older, long-term homeless individuals. For labour exploitation, strangers hanging around outside the hotel and trying to befriend residents, leaving the hotel for long periods of time during the day or at night, residents mentioning payment in drugs or alcohol, being picked up in vehicles from outside the hotel. For financial exploitation, residents may not have any money the day their benefits are paid. Residents may show increased worry or panic on a certain day of the week. Residents may not have access to their own money, benefits or bank card, or a resident might leave a hotel after receiving a call. There are a lot of signs here to remember, and we're not asking you to remember them all. The most important thing is that if you notice something that seems wrong or doesn't sit right, that you report it. And now we'll tell you how. As modern slavery is hidden, you're unlikely to be sure whether it's happening or not. You need to trust your instinct, that gut feeling. We always encourage staff to discuss concerns with their colleagues. They might have spotted something similar, or they might reassure you that there is an innocent explanation. We've discussed the signs of exploitation, but the truth is you are unlikely to see them all. However, once you start seeing 2 or 3 signs, it is important to act. When there is immediate danger, you should always call 999. Immediate danger is when someone is at risk or of experiencing significant harm unless someone intervenes straight away. For example, if you think someone might be assaulted. If there is no immediate danger, but you are still concerned about the situation and think it might be exploitative, then you have several options. In some areas, there might be a caseworker or social worker from the council, local authority, or other homeless support organisations who is in charge of safeguarding the residents. In these cases, you should always report to them. They have the responsibility to protect residents from harm, which includes stopping exploitation. If there isn't a caseworker or they aren't available, you or one of your colleagues can call the non-emergency number for the police or call the modern slavery helpline. You might be more comfortable for your manager or your duty manager to make the call. Both these numbers will be able to take your report and act on it if they think it is appropriate. If the individual owes money to their exploiter, the illegal money lending team can provide general advice on how to make sure the survivor is protected from the lender and make sure that they won't have to pay back any more money. On their line, there will be no pressure to provide personal details. If you have some suspicions but you have very little information, for example, you might have seen a van hanging around outside but none of the residents entering, you can also report these small pieces of information to us at Stop the Traffic through our Stop app. However, if you think somebody needs safeguarding, call one of the other numbers instead of using the app. You can download the app for free at Google Play or using the App Store. Remember, it is not your responsibility to protect the residents, but you can have a significant impact if you report your concerns to the appropriate person. The following information is for staff from support organisations only. It is not appropriate for hotel staff. Hotel staff can stop watching the video now. These questions can help you uncover stories of exploitation. It's important to recognise that many victims of modern slavery don't see themselves as victims. We've often seen that in the homeless community, what we would classify as exploitation would often be called bullying or simple mistreatment by people with that lived experience. These questions can be found in the training resources that accompany this video. It is really important that individuals are safeguarded in the correct way and with the trauma-informed response. We have outlined steps to follow in the resource document which accompanies this video. However, this is not sufficient to properly safeguard somebody who has been through an exploitative experience, and we encourage you to seek further training if you expect to be put in the position of safeguarding somebody. Fortunately, once a survivor is identified, the government has a statutory obligation to provide support for them through the National Referral Mechanism. There is more information on the National Referral Mechanism and the support it can provide in the resources accompanying this video. If you have any questions on the training that you've just received or would like more information to follow up, then you can email me, Tom Madden from Stop the Traffic, out using the email provided. If you or your organisations feel unsure about the support available for survivors of exploitation, we would strongly encourage you to seek further training on the issue. In order to do this, you can reach out to the Human Trafficking Foundation's National Network of Modern Slavery Coordinators. Using the web page provided, you can see a map of survivor support services for the UK to identify your local anti-slavery partnership. Or alternatively, if the map is up to date or you can't find contact details, you can email info@humantraffickingfoundation.org. Thanks for watching this video, and thanks for all of our partners who contributed to the training.